I always love playing that video. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining today's discussion hosted by the Alliance for Peacebuilding. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nick Zarowski, which I know that my Zoom display name says Alliance for Peacebuilding. I'm not the actual organization itself, but I am a manager for policy and advocacy here at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. AFP is a member-based organization made up of 200 plus. We recently hit 200 peacebuilding organizations working in 191 countries around the world. And AFP's goal is to build and advance the peacebuilding field across many sectors and many key issues, one of which, of course, is governance, which we're going to discuss today. We have a panel of incredible lineup of speakers from government to the practitioner side, and we're working in close partnership with Management Systems International, a Tetra Tech company, and a very valued member of AFP to discuss today the nexus of peacebuilding and governance. We're going to begin by turning it over to Christy Martins, who is a practice area leader for Peace and Stability, MSI, who will be moderating today's discussion and introducing our speakers. Christy is a friend and ally and close partner of AFP, so it's always a pleasure to work with her. And Christy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nick. I love those new titles, friend and ally. Appreciate it. And thanks for the introduction and for hosting us. And I see it looks like Shelley was able to join, which is great. So I think our technical difficulties are handled. So as Nick said, we wanted to host this discussion to really start to dive into, hopefully, first of many conversations around this topic of the intersection of the peacebuilding and governance fields. I think for those of us who work more on the conflict side, like myself, we see in a variety of different conflict contexts constantly how weak governance structures is a driver of conflict almost no matter what other, complications or complexities we're seeing in these conflict contexts, weak governance structures can be a driver. Conversely, when we try to work together with governance structures, whatever those might be, oftentimes at the local level, oftentimes in coordination with civil society, and as relates to public service delivery, we can really see peace dividends and start advancing towards peace and stabilization. And so I'm thrilled today to have with us Jesus Coronado, who is really the catalyst for bringing this panel together. Jesus is visiting us in Washington from his home in Bogota, and he's going to speak with us about the Colombia experience and best practices that we're seeing coming out of the OTI Colombia Transforma program, which is implemented by MSI. I don't think I've seen anywhere else in the world where these two fields intersect so much as in Colombia in terms of peace building and governance, particularly since the 2016 Peace Accord. So I'm thrilled to hear from Jesus. And then we'll also dive into how the peace building community uses people-centered approaches and, sort of always has, looked at communities to be really the guiding driver for us when we're trying to achieve peace, and how the DRG space with Shelley on the line is really coming into more and more focusing on people-centered approaches around human rights and justice and other fields within the DRG space. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists. As I said, we have Jesus Coronado on the line, and he's going to kick us off speaking about the Colombia experience. We also have Sam Ratner from Win Without War, and he is going to, I think the invite said best practices from Northern Mozambique. I think we might still be at the recommendation stage. So Sam's going to dive into some recommendations, maybe as we look at the context, particularly in Cabo Delgado, and how we can merge these two practices to achieve impact in that space. We have Julia Drude, who's Chief of Staff from the CPS Bureau and also has extensive technical experience, particularly in Eastern and Southern Africa. And then Shelley Inglis, who I understand is a new recruit to the DRG Bureau and spent much of her career in conflict context. So an excellent contributor to this topic as well. Jesus, if I may, I will hand it over to you. Anybody participating, please feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we'll reserve about the last 15 minutes for Q&A from the audience.
Well, thanks, Christy, and hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity of sharing the experience of Colombia Transforma working in governance for promoting the implementation of the 2016 Peace Accord. And just can you confirm if you can see my screen, please?
I can see your video, Jesus. I can't see your slides.
Okay. Now, can you see it or not?
No.
Okay, just give me a second, please.
Take your time. This looks promising, Jesus. Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks.
I can see them now.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as I was saying, I'm going to talk about the experience of Colombia Transforma working in governance as a way to promote the implementation of the 2016 Peace Accord of the country. And I'm going to touch 4 points. The first one is I'm going to do a quick overview of the Colombia's armed conflict and how it relates with governance. The second point that I'm going to talk about is the effects of this lack of governance in the armed conflict. The third one is I'm going to talk a bit about the 2016 Peace Accord opportunity in terms of governance. And also I'm going to talk about OTI support to this window of opportunity. And finally, I'm going to give some examples of activities that Colombia Transforma do that relates or that intersects, as Christy was saying, intersects the governance with the peace building and implementation of the peace accord. Well, related to Colombia's armed conflict, this is one of the longest armed conflicts in the world, and it's a conflict that is constantly changing, is constantly mutating, and these changes relates with the dynamic of the conflict. There are several illegal armed groups in the country. These illegal armed groups are appearing, disappearing, making alliances. You have different illicit economies also. So this makes that the conflict is very, very complex. And also the complexity deals with the fact that in different regions, you have different manifestations of the conflict. You can't say that the same things that happens in a region such as the Bajo Cauca Kenya are the same that happens in other regions such as Pacifico Nariñense. The dynamics are quite different, the actors are different, the effects of the armed conflict are different. So this is what makes our armed conflict a very complex one. And issues such as the profound centralization. Colombia is a highly centralized country. The presence of illegal crops, illicit crops, such as coca crops, and the alliances among illegal armed groups add a little bit of more complexity to the situation. And more than 60 years of the armed conflict have created several challenges for governance. There are, for instance, there are some regions in the country where the presence of illegal armed groups makes nearly impossible that the government do any action, any type of action. Other effects of the armed conflict is that it caused a lack of social cohesion, poor social capital. Also, the presence of illegal, as I was saying, the presence of illegal armed groups makes very difficult the presence and the investment of public entities. In some places there is also distrust of international cooperation, and that's the reason of this is that some of these illegal armed groups that are still being active in the country are very ideologized, and people, inhabitants of some places, adopts this discourse, this highly ideologized discourse. Well, and some of the effects of this lack of governance in the armed conflict is that this lack of institutional presence becomes an argument that politically fits the armed conflict. And if you ask people, usually we collect a lot of information. We do a lot of interviews trying to evaluate or for evaluating our interventions. And when you ask the people about the causes of the armed conflict, they will say something like state absence, lack of investment, lack of institutional presence. So this is an idea that is profoundly rooted in some places of the country. So this idea fits the armed conflict and justifies it, and justifies, for example, the presence of some illegal armed groups. Other effect is that the narrative that this narrative of state absence, lack of presence, lack of investment is so strong in some places that the government actions are nearly invisible or could become invisible. So even that the government is doing things, the narrative is so strong that people will not recognize what is happening. That is, that there is investment, that there is presence. People won't recognize that because the narrative in some places is the narrative of state absence, lack of investment is very strong. And as you can see, both these things can be addressed through governance, through working in governance. Okay, about the 2016 Peace Accord opportunity, this accord is an historic milestone in Colombia's efforts to build a stable peace. And it opened the door for deep transformations that may build a stable and durable peace. And it's important to perceive it or to adopt it more as a process than a checklist or something that you must fulfill or such as a turnkey project. It's important to understand that that this milestone creates an opportunity, an opportunity. It's a process, and perhaps it's a long-term process. And an interesting fact about our peace accord, our 2016 peace accord, is that it not only focuses on silencing the weapons, on demobilizing the fighters. It has a lot of dispositions. I think that more than 80% of the dispositions of the peace accord deals with or proposed changes that are substantial and that are justifications of the continuity of the armed conflict. So this is an important characteristic, and that's the importance of the peace accord. The idea that it will change or will promote changes that will change conditions that are in the root of in the roots of the armed conflict. And ODI is, excuse me, can you hear me well? Okay. And ODI is supporting this effort, this window of opportunity since 2015. As this is a huge window of opportunity for building a stable and durable peace. And Colombia Transforma supports this process and take advantage or seize this opportunity through different perspectives. One of these perspectives which have been very important since the very beginning of the program is governance. So we have several activities that deals with efficiency of the public sector, that deals with community participation, which deals with accountability. And these topics are essential for the reasons that I've mentioned before. Well, what Colombia Transforma does? Well, we have some activities, and this is like the biggest part of our portfolio. We do a lot of activities which aims to catalyze community and public sector collaboration. The second group of activities, or the second dimension in which Colombia Transforma works with governance for promoting the implementation of the peace accord is we do activities that promotes public sector efficiency and service provision. And finally, we do several activities also for improving the relations among national and territorial entities, or among national entities, or among local authorities. In the first group, the activities that catalyzes community and public sector collaboration. As I mentioned, it is the biggest portion of our portfolio. In some places of the country, is the only way to implement things through collaboration. And sometimes it's important not only to do the actual project, but to do it collaboratively, because in some places if you don't coordinate, if you don't articulate, then you won't be able to even enter and try to do anything. We promote this collaboration mainly through small infrastructure projects such as bridges, such as tertiary roads, community centers, educative infrastructure. And the interesting thing of doing projects through these collaborative models is that, or with a lot of participation and contribution, is that it creates practical links among actors that acts or are effective in changing perceptions that are related to the armed conflict. Perceptions such as the communities think that they can do anything with the government. So practical links, developing a project together shows them that they can do it, that they can work together with the government and do some things after years of lack of presence of the institutions and the public sector. And on the other hand, it changes perceptions of the public sector in terms that they can't do projects in certain places of the country because of security issues. And other effects relates with the creation of capacities. These activities creates leadership and management capacities, also technical capacities in the communities. As they are empowered, they are executing, they are the direct responsibles of implementing the projects. And on the other hand, it creates new project implementation practices in public entities, such as accountability practices, or practices of giving technical assistance to communities in order to assure that the projects are being well executed and that they are obtaining the results that both the communities and the municipalities want to achieve. These changes in perceptions are also like the first step. It will be like, it's a process, it's something that will change eventually, but these activities have shown, and we have evidence also that shows us that these activities are good first steps for changing these bad relations that exists among public sector and communities. Well, the second dimension, or the second group of activities that we do are activities that promotes public sector efficiency and service delivery. And we do activities that improve processes and service delivery in rural areas. We do, for example, service delivery fairs, in which is possible that several entities, even local authorities or national entities, provide services in rural areas. And this sounds like a very simple idea, but it's quite an important idea, because in some places, as I mentioned, people state sometimes things like we haven't seen like any presence or any service provision of a national or a local authority since 10 years ago. And you can find those types of affirmations when you talk to people. So it's important to assure, or these activities actually show that the government is trying to do something in terms to change what has happened before in terms of service provision. And other good thing about these activities is that the effect that they have, the geographic effect that these activities has, not only goes to the place in which the services are being provided through word of mouth. the communities are communicating what is happening. So if you do something in some place, well, inhabitants of other villages will also have information and perhaps will change their perception about the government and what the government trying to do in order to implement the peace accord. And finally, the third group of activities, and this is also like a very important part of our portfolio, are activities which aims to improve or create relations among local stakeholders and national entities, local authorities and national entities. For example, we have activities in which we design projects. And the importance of these activities is that as Colombia is a highly centralized country, these project design activities can promote the investment in some places of the country, in conflict affected areas particularly. And we're also, and the program has also promoted the creation of associations of municipalities in two regions, and strengthened the association of municipalities in other regions, as we find that this is a good mechanism to close the gap between the national government and local authorities. It is also very helpful for planning the territory and to attend a problem or to attend problems that relates with the armed conflict that surpasses the municipalities and that must be addressed in a regional or even national manner. And finally, you have some activities in which we promote changes in procedures, in critical topics, in critical issues for implementation of the peace accord, such as victims reparation or land tenure. These are like in the core of the armed conflict. So changing procedures, making them more efficient are essential. So in these three dimensions is where most of our activities related with governance can be like aggregated. And that's what I wanted to share with you. Just wanted to emphasize at the end that the intention for us is very important. We don't do this because we want to assure efficiency or transparency, but we do it because we want to change the perception that people has regarding the public sector and the perceptions that the public sector has regarding the communities and complex geographies of the country. Well, thanks a lot. And that's what I wanted to share. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Jesus. And I love the wrap up that you just shared, you know, the importance of perceptions and the relationship building and the trust building to achieve the peace dividends, and how, you know, the negative perceptions can be exploited by the armed groups, but flipping that on its head and really focusing on the process as much as the product of what the government is delivering can improve opportunities for peace. Jesus, it looks like you're still sharing your screen, but we just see sort of the desktop.
Okay.
While we're working that out, I'm going to go to Julia. And Julia, I know you and I have talked at length actually about CPS being particularly interested in exploring the intersection of peace building and governance for at least the last few years. And I'm wondering if you can just talk with us a little bit about that thinking and experience.
First, thank you so much for having me here today. Really excited about this panel. And thanks, Jesus, for the very thoughtful presentation as well. It's really illustrative, actually, of what I want to talk about in answering this good question from Christy. So I'll start with, in considering the nexus of peace building and governance, let's start with what we know about peace building. We know that investing in preventing conflict and conflict sensitivity is more effective, it's more humane, it's more sustainable, it's more cost saving than focusing on responding to crises and conflicts. Now, we know that also world's violent conflicts right now are not new, but they're rather just stuck in cycles of recurring or intractable conflicts that have yet to be stopped. And unfortunately, we also know that we're at a 15-year low in official development investment and assistance for peace building, despite last year having the largest number of violent conflicts since 1946. So the question is, why, despite all that we know about peace building, do we see such stark realities around the world for peace building? This is the question that we at USAID, and particularly at our Bureau for Conflict Prevention and Stabilization, have been even more focused on since we launched our bureau a few years ago as the agency's first dedicated bureau to peace building. So what we're exploring in a deeper way is not new to peace building, but what we're hoping to bring to it are some new approaches and new partnerships that we hope will change the equation. So what we're focused on is at the heart of these fragile systems that are not resiliently managing conflict. For us, this is the intersection of peace building and governance. What we've aimed to focus on now more than ever, particularly as we face democratic recession on so many fronts around the world, is that we need to address this growing trust deficit if we're going to make an impact at all on peace. And again, Jesus spoke to this really well in the example of Colombia and the work that they're doing. So we're seeing a breakdown of the social contract between communities and governments. We're seeing other forces coming in and taking advantage of those deficits and those gaps, whether it be non-democratic actors, violent extremists, or other self-interested armed groups that want to exploit those opportunities. So what we really want to focus on is putting trust back at the core of those relationships. And for us, we have to recognize the interdependency between peace building and governance. If one, conflict is going to be managed effectively before it leads to violence, and if two, preventing the potential escalation of conflict, if that's going to be the preferred approach. So what we've learned about this connection between peace building and governance is that we got to widen the tent of stakeholders that are necessary to engage, and not just our usual interlocutors. Peace building requires engaging all levels and all types of governance actors, and not just government actors. And that's from the national to the local, the official, the unofficial, those that are globally connected, those that are hyper-localized. They all need to be part of the tent because there's roles and responsibilities for a variety of governance actors. And importantly, we have to recognize the other half of the equation to where peace building and governance coincide, and that's in enabling the agency of constituents to have the ability and the access to influence the trajectory of governance in productive ways. Again, hearkening back to Jesus's presentation about that, promoting that collaboration between communities and public sector. So for us at USAID, the focus of this intersection of governance and peace building has been best codified in the Global Fragility Act and our US strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. It's because the goal of this strategy for us is to support partners' efforts to address those governance challenges before they lead to destabilizing conflict and violence. So now we've got the opportunity to get ahead of crises and work to prevent them with both a multi-stakeholder approach, but also a long-term approach. So the best example we have of this right now is some of our work that we're doing in coastal West Africa, where we've recently launched a new initiative called the Coastal State Stability Mechanism. And this is a joint initiative with the German government, USAID, and the governments of Ghana, Benin, and Togo, implemented by IOM. And really, the core focus of this program is to strengthen state presence and relationships with local communities to really counteract the spread of violent extremism from the Sahel. So the communities and the local governments, national government partners in each of those 3 West African countries, they've taken the lead to inform the activities that we undertake together. And moving forward, these are the voices that we have to include. So that's just one example of how we're supporting local and multi-stakeholder initiatives to address that intersection of governance and peace building, because we know that improving governance, again, is critical to promoting long-term stability. And without focusing on building that trust between relationships between people and governments, then we're not going to be able to really achieve sustainable peace and progress. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Julia. And that's a good segue over to Sam, who's going to speak a bit about recommendations for northern Mozambique, especially as you were talking about the need to work with all governance actors, maybe moving beyond the ones that we might typically think of, particularly local government. I think in Cabo Delgado, both Sam and I have experience there, where you have some very strong district administrators and good champions for stabilization. So Sam, I'll stop talking because I could talk about Mozambique forever, but let me hand it over to you to talk about recommendations for that context.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Christy, and thanks so much for putting this panel together and for having me. This is wonderful. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sam Reiner. I'm the policy director at Win Without War. And before I came to Win Without War, I was the head of analysis at Cabo Delgado, which is ACLED's project to track the conflict in northern Mozambique. And so as a journalist and an analyst, I covered the conflict for about 5 years. And I was really interested to kind of be on this panel because I think the conflict in Cabo Delgado offers a really interesting example of tension in this, in how we think about the interaction between peace building and governance, right? That when we think about how governance can influence peace building, we often think about the ways in which improving governance in the sense of service delivery and improving the institutions around service delivery can play a key role in peace building. And Jesus gave some great examples of what that looks like. And I think there's also a sense in which, and Jesus talked about this as well, a sense in which, when we talk about governance in this context, we're talking about the sense of local democratic control over decisions that affect local areas. In Cabo Delgado, if folks don't have a background in the conflict, this is a civil war that's taking place, right on top of a very large natural gas development. A development that has long had the kind of promise of really radically restructuring Mozambique's economy if the gas can be brought to market, and also it takes place on top of, and I think not coincidentally, an area in which collaboration between the Mozambican central government and international energy companies that are involved in gas projects have really limited in recent years the extent of local control and input available to people on the ground in Cabo Delgado. And from years of covering the conflict, I think if I was to boil down conflict drivers, I think it would be largely about questions of local control over politics, over resource distribution, and the shape of development, over religion, and a range of other things. And so when we talk about programming to improve governance in a peace building context, often what we're talking about is programming that happens either through funding or in interaction with, or around the infrastructure of major international energy companies or major NGOs to provide significant improvements in service delivery in an area where they're badly needed, where even before the conflict and the destruction and displacement that has followed it, government service delivery was very weak. And there were real concerns about people's ability to access the things they most need to succeed. But what those programs can't really provide, or at least not without some real kind of thinking beforehand, is an improvement in local control, right? That if service delivery programs, if the kind of governance that we're looking at is about how can we bring in major institutions that are from outside the area but are major stakeholders in the area to by their own actions improve service delivery. It's great from a service delivery perspective, but it actually undermines the progress towards local control, right? The decisions about security, about gas, about the shape of rebuilding from the devastation of the conflict remain in that system closely held at the level of national government and at energy company leadership and at international stakeholders. And so I think a key question in Mozambique in particular, and I think also broadly as we think about the interaction between governance and peace building, is how as international peace builders can we, build out programming and build out institutions in our programming that actually create and codify local control and input over how these programs function. And I think in particular, the one of the tensions in Mozambique is that international peacebuilding organizations are really constrained in the ways that they can affect relations between local and national governments, right? I mean, Christy talked about the strong district administrators, and they are strong, and they're major advocates for their districts, but they're also very constrained by the centralization of control in the Mozambican state, and there's a real limit to how international peace builders can address that. I think where international peace builders are slightly less constrained, although still quite constrained, is in pushing other international actors, be it energy companies, be it project funders, be it major NGOs, to center local accountability in the structures of their governance interventions. If local communities are institutionally able to hold major stakeholders accountable for engaging with local preferences, institutional muscles for local control grow both in terms of local civil society, where we help to grow, but also in those major stakeholder institutions, right? If there's a way to codify these things, then there's learning happening on both sides, both in terms of what local preferences are, and in terms of how those can be accommodated and institutionalized going forward. And as those muscles grow, I think that's a way to feedback up into the relationship between local governments, local communities, and national governments, which is often mediated through those institutions in ways that actually can be generative for peace building and conflicts that are driven by questions of local control. So to give a recommendation here, I think when we think about peace building programming for Cabo Delgado, whether it's through the Global Fragility Act or it's through other contexts, I think we should be asking whether there are accessible, enforceable mechanisms within that programming for local input and accountability. And if not, how do we create those? I think that should be a watchword for how we think about that programming going forward. Yeah, I see a hand actually. So I'll happy to talk through this more in the Q&A section. But thanks so much. This has been great.
Sam, can you do a sound check for me?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I hear some echo as well.
All right, so my laptop mic stopped working, so I'm also on my phone. So I'm gonna ask Nick to please allow me to turn my video on my phone.
Yes, will do.
Thank you. All right, and we're going to switch gears and turn to Shelley now, who's just off the DRG conference last week. And Shelley, I'd like to ask you to please share with the group how DRG is using people-centered approaches increasingly in its programming.
Thanks, Christy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I also don't have the ability to put on my video because of the host, but
Oh,
there we go.
There you go. Yep.
So perfect. Thank you. So thanks to you, Christy, MSI, and AFP for having me here. It's a great conversation. I hope it can be continued because it feels like just the start of one. I just want to speak a little bit about people-centered approaches, as Christy mentioned, from the democratic governance, human rights, rule of law perspective. Something that I think has really been a movement to sort of reframe a bit how we're doing institutional democratic reforms in terms of dealing with the trust deficit that we have, not just trust deficit that is being spoken about here in terms of because of conflict drivers, but trust deficit overall that is within countries around governance and institutions and democratic processes. And I think the other key, shared goal with some of the other speakers in terms of these people-centered approaches is to build in those muscles of accountability and enforcement for democratic process and decision-making including injustice. But I think people-centered approaches means different things to different people, and I don't know that we have enough time to really unpack what it means. And so I'll give you a sense of what it means in the context of our work, but there's probably a longer conversation to be had where the overlap is. And I think the first thing to say up front is that people-centered approaches is not just sort of an ideological shift, it is also a sort of practice shift into the type of tools and approaches that are used in order to be people-centered. And I think some of those haven't been spoken about so much here, but we've really laid them out in terms of, pathways for people-centered justice. In terms of overall governance, there is more discussion of people-centeredness in local governance programming, and I think the Mozambique example and the Colombian example help to flesh that out a little bit. But in terms of people-centered justice, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we think this changes in terms of approaches. First is, really people-centeredness means we need to understand people's problems, their daily issues, their legal issues, and their experience, perceptions, but also experience with seeking out solutions for their legal issues and their problems or their challenges in conflict with others or in conflict with the state. And so doing that requires a lot more and different types of data than traditionally has been gleaned from governance institutions and processes. And so there's a big shift in not only having data-driven solutions, but the kinds of data and the use of data in terms of informing decision-making when it comes to reforms, governance reforms, and justice reforms. So I think the data-driven orientation of the work is really an important shift. The other shifts are really around multiple pathways and understanding that people seek out resolution of their conflicts, of their legal issues, of their problems in multiple ways. And that depends on who they are and where they are, and in an intersectional way, as well as a place-based way. So people-centeredness really has an openness to multiple pathways and multiple ways of remedying issues, problems, rights violations, and a broader range of means and mechanisms to do that, and making sure that all of those means and mechanisms work in a way that enhance people's outcomes, the outcomes that they're seeking when they're seeking a resolution of their issues. And those issues, of course, as you know, can be multiple and varied in terms of whether they are administrative type issues, whether they are civil issues, criminal issues, licensing, business, family issues. They really vary, and each of sort of the means and pathways to address those issues should vary as well. There's obviously a user-friendliness approach to people-centeredness. So you're looking at the experience and making governance processes easier for people, more accessible for addressing barriers, all of that. And that user-friendliness is driven again by data and the ability to understand people's experiences and what they can and cannot access and the barriers they have and overcoming them. It's also solution focused, so looking at what are the actual ways in which people get good outcomes and what are the solutions that can be replicated. And then there's in people-centeredness, as in peace building, a prevention orientation and trying to address the underlying causes of legal problems in a proactive and systematic manner. So you prevent sort of escalation into broader systemic type challenges or into recurrence in the cases of certain forms of legal or democratic process problems. So those are the elements of what we think of when we're talking about people-centeredness, which is not just about sort of, addressing people's needs in a broad base. It is service-oriented. but it isn't, as some people have said, it's sort of a shift away from institutional responses. And it's exactly not that. It's making institutions people-centered, driving reforms and institutional developments, investments in a way that the institutions themselves are responding to people's needs and experiences and are focused on giving them just outcomes. I'll leave it there because I know it took a while.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shelley. And I love that you said this is a start of a conversation, because I hope it is. Jesus, I'm going to switch back to you. So much of what Shelley said resonated for me in terms of the Colombia experience, and particularly your work on Transforma. Thinking about how data-driven Transforma is, particularly with you in the lead as the MEL director, how we use place-based strategies to catalyze impacts, and how we're really working on these perception issues. And as Shelley said, not steering away from institutional strengthening or steering away from institutions, but making sure that we work with them in ways that improve people-centeredness. So Jesus, back over to you. From your perspective, how has the Transforma program incorporated people-centered approaches into its design and implementation?
Well, thanks, Christy. I would like to highlight 4 points here. The first one deals with the something that Shelley was mentioning, and also Julia, is the lack of trust. And we've developed through trial and error several models in which collaboration is like the way in which we are trying to change this lack of trust. So, and this collaboration means actually that people is contributing with ideas, deciding what we will do together in certain place. And by together, I mean Colombia Transforma communities and population or inhabitants of certain places, and also the authorities. So we're not deciding for them. We're not saying them, we will do this project, we will do this type of infrastructure, we will do this training. But what we actually do is that we try to understand the need. And when we understand the need, we see the window of opportunity, and we work with them in implementing the project. So these type of practical links are the way in which the program creates or try to change trust. You can't expect to first that the people trust in each other and then do a project. The way to create trust is through doing things, right? So our models start by asking the people. The implementation of our projects starts by asking the people, and then we decide together what we will do. So that's the first point that I will mention. And regarding, Sam said also a very important thing that relates with this, and that's the idea of input and control. The control of the projects, the visibility of the project is not ours. Is the visibility of the projects is of our partners. Even that the project or the main responsibility or the of our partner is a national agency or is a local community, the control and all the visibility and what we want to achieve, and all the credits of what is achieved, it goes to them and goes to the implementation of the Peace Accord. And regarding while Shelley was speaking about people-centered justice, I just wanted to share that in one region of the country, the Bajo Cauca Antioqueño, the problem, or there is a big problem of lack of justice, particularly. And what happens there is that the lack of institutions that can provide justice services actually makes that people goes to the illegal armed groups for conflict resolution. So in this particular region, we are doing several activities in which what we try to do is to ask the people which are the problems that they need to solve, which could be the best way to solve these problems, to what institution they must go to solve the problem, and then we design the activities that we should do. So, and during this process, we collect information, and the thing, and as Shelley mentioned, I think that that's something that we at the program can do to take advantage of these experiences is to share the experiences with the national government in order to promote that the experiences, these like very localized experiences are known and then become like alternatives for promoting more justice in conflict affected areas. And the idea here is like, in the same way in which we do infrastructure projects, we try to understand the needs of the people in terms of access to justice, and then design the activities trying to involve all the actors that can give a solution to that problem. And perhaps those are the ideas that I will share regarding what my colleagues said before. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jesus. I recognize we only have about 5 minutes left. We packed a lot into this panel. So again, just doubling down on Shelley's suggestion that this be the start of a conversation. But I did see one particularly pertinent question in the chat that I wanted to get to from an audience member. And I'm hoping, Julia, you might be able to take the lead on responding to this. And it was just about how we program for capacity development of civil society organizations, and particularly thinking about your comments around considering all governance actors, just not government itself. How might you respond to that question about how we can incorporate capacity development of civil society into our programming?
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to use a separate microphone. That's a great question because it is such an important aspect of the work that we do, both at CPS, but also where Shelley sits in the Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance Bureau as well. It's really focusing on identifying local civil society, community-based organizations that are really the backbone of a lot of the work around peace building and certainly around governance as well. So absolutely, it features as a key component of, who are the right organizations that, coming back to trust, that communities trust, that can help promote access, that have a technical expertise, that again can be the facilitator of a lot of the work, and certainly are going to be the core to any sustainable approach to peace building and development. These are the actors that are going to be there for the long term and are certainly the most locally based and resonant. So behind any peace building program strategy is really taking an effort to identify, again, the right constellation of these groups, civil society groups. They may be service providers, they may be advocates, they may be analysts, communicators, really pulling them all together to really ensure you have a holistic set of actors and groups that are involved. And certainly for us in the peace building space, but other sectors as well, really focusing on taking a conflict sensitive approach to identifying these groups, to working with these groups, so that it is ensuring that you're not inadvertently jumping into conflict dynamics, exacerbating conflict dynamics, that you're really taking a thoughtful approach, again, focusing on who's seen as legitimate, who's seen as effective, and really empowering them. And they should be at the forefront of all solution generation and all problem solving in these efforts if we really want to make a sustainable change. So thank you for the really important question.
Great. Thank you, Julia. I'm going to pass back to Nick to close us out in just a minute, but just want to thank our panelists again. Jesus, Julia, Sam, and Shelley, really appreciate you joining us today. And I hope folks can stay tuned for the next panel where we'll dive a bit deeper on some of these topics. So Nick, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Christy, and thank you to wonderful remarks and insights from our panelists. It's always a pleasure working with MSI to organize these conversations and events. As people have noted, this event was recorded, so we'll be sure to post this on YouTube afterwards, and we'll send the link to the registrants for this event as well. So I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day. We look forward to seeing you at the next AFP convening. Thank you.